سعيد كبير مستشاري المركز الاقليمي للدراسات الاستراتيجية. سوف أبدأ بالتعريف بالمركز، وبعد ذلك سوف يدير الأستاذ أشرف نجيب مدير الحلقة، وفي النهاية سوف يتلوها مناقشة أكاديمية لمدة جلسة ساعة و40 دقيقة. نحن نعمل هنا في مركز إقليمي للدراسات الاستراتيجية، مركز تفكير تأسس عام 2012 بالقاهرة، يهتم بمتابعة وتحليل وتقدير التحولات الإقليمية ذات الطابع الاستراتيجي على ساحة الشرق الأوسط، إضافة إلى التفاعلات الدولية المؤثرة على الإقليم على مستوى التطورات الداخلية والعلاقات الإقليمية والاتجاهات الاقتصادية والشؤون الأمنية واتجاهات الرأي العام عبر أنشطة علمية متعددة تهتم اهتماما خاصا بالتفاعل مع دوائر صنع القرار والتيارات المؤثرة والمؤسسات الشريكة داخل دول المنطقة، من خلال تقديم التحليلات والتقديرات والاستشارات والعمل كنقطة التقاء بين الخبراء الأكاديميين والممارسين السياسيين بهدف العمل على دعم الاستقرار الإقليمي. إن السمة الأساسية للمركز هي أنه إقليمي، يهتم بمتابعة التطورات على ساحة جيوستراتيجية واسعة تضم كافة الدول العربية والأطراف الإقليمية المجاورة لها أو المتداخلة معها والمساحات المائية المحيطة بها، إضافة إلى الأطراف الدولية الرئيسية ذات المصالح أو الاهتمام بشؤون الإقليم، سواء كان الأمر يتعلق بدول أو قوى سياسية أو جماعات داخل الدول أو شركات أو منظمات محلية أو إقليمية أو دولية أو وسائل إعلام أو شخصيات عامة، فالنطاق هو الشرق الأوسط. وتستند المهمة الرئيسية للمركز على الرؤية التي حكمت إنشاؤه، وهي أن المنطقة تشهد في الوقت الحالي تحولات ذات طابع جذري في البيئة الاستراتيجية خلال فترة الثورات العربية بما يمس كل الدول على كل المستويات، وسيؤدي ذلك إلى تغيير شكل الإقليم بأوضاعه الداخلية وعلاقاته البينية ونمط تحالفاته وصراعاته في كل الاتجاهات على نحو يحدد ملامح السنوات العشر القادمة على الأقل. ووفقا لمهمة المركز فإن ذلك الوضع يتطلب تحليلا وتقديرا وتفاعلا متواصلا مع الفاعلين الرئيسيين فيه بهدف تأمين الانتقال إلى أوضاع ديمقراطية وتنموية وأمنية تعمل في اتجاه شرق أوسط أكثر استقرارا. سوف تبدأ الآن في
Sorry, he's just going to get through these. I'll be conducting in English today. We have our translations, just to make it easier on our guests that are here for us to hear today. I want to give my extreme gratitude to the Regional Center for Strategic Studies for holding this event here today. It's very important that we maintain an open dialogue, as always. I'm very thankful as well that you have me here, not as an academic. I represent the private sector per se, a businessman, so a capitalist. So, hopefully I'll be able to put a little bit of that flair into the discussion. I want to thank our guests for the report that they wrote, all the participants. I'd like to thank Dr. Marcello Giugali for being with us here today. And I don't want to go on further. I just want to thank Mr. Ahmed Kushk as well for being with us, Mr. Mark Tobias, Mr. Abdullah Sai, and Sahar Hussein for being here with us today. We welcome you all. Marcello, I will not take any more time. Please go ahead, give us your perspective on how did you come up with the report? What are your recommendations to us? What has been happening, for the past, 2-3 years? Egypt has been going, political, social, economic changes that are even beyond what we had expected before 2011. I don't think anybody in this room really thought that this was going to happen and happen at the time that it happened now. The hopes that we had was a political social revolution. Our hopes and aspirations are also an economic revolution, and that we have not seen yet, and that's what we want to work towards within the coming years. World Bank is extremely useful and helpful to us in terms of government decisions, in terms of private sector decisions, and we want to be able to work hand in hand on building this economy. It's like Nietzsche says, you know, those that were seen dancing were thought to be crazy by those who did not hear the music. So we're here to play a little bit of music for you to hear, please.
Well, thank you very much. It is for me a great honor and a pleasure to be here. Today is my first day in Egypt after 20 years of absence. I was here living in Cairo 20 years ago, and it was a very different place. So this idea that Egypt doesn't change is not true. I'm a living proof of that. It does, and it does in very fundamental ways. My role today is simply to introduce my team and let them present the report. I have to say we couldn't have brought, in my opinion, a more timely report. If there is one message behind this socio-economic political revolution is we need more jobs, period. It's very simple. Because of my own job, I travel the world. I cover the whole world. I go from country to country. I just came from Paraguay. I will go from here to India. And I wish I had received $1 every time a Minister of Finance says to me, how do we create more jobs? By now I would be a millionaire. You know, our advice has always been, and continues to be, growth, economic growth, is a necessary but not sufficient condition for poverty to fall. You can have a lot of growth, but if the growth is captured by only a few elites, poverty may not still fall. Now, this is the case of many African countries based on extractive industries. At the same time, we always said, and this was something I remember saying here in Egypt 20 years ago, inflation is a sufficient but not necessary condition for poverty to increase. You see, the poor cannot protect themselves against inflation, so a little bit of inflation will push more people in poverty. So you have a complete asymmetry. Growth is necessary but not sufficient for poverty to fall, and inflation is sufficient but not necessary for poverty to rise. So the message was always keep a good, solid, sustainable macroeconomic framework. Well, they did, many countries did, and still they didn't see poverty because they didn't see job creation happening. So the next step for us was, okay, what's missing? Yes, the macroeconomic framework is so important, but the jobs are not happening. What's missing? And to put it in a concrete message, what's missing was business dynamism. And by that we mean firms, and by firms could be a very large one or an individual, coming in, up or out of the market. In, up or out. You come in very quickly, you grow fast, and if you don't succeed, you get out. And those resources are allocated to another sector. This idea of in, up or out is very difficult to convey politically for most countries, because we tend to protect our markets and our investors. It turns out that the data show us that doesn't work very well. You will see in the report, there is some data there saying we don't get a lot of in, up or out in the Middle East. If anything, we get a lot less than in other regions in the world. Now, let me also say, if it is in, up or out, can we focalize ourselves, can we target those companies that create those jobs in that fashion, those dynamic companies? Well, when you look at the data, what comes out is that most private net job creation, meaning the jobs that you want at the margin, come from very young, very fast learning, high productivity companies, firms that can innovate very quickly. They come into the market, innovate, exploit a niche, either grow very fast or get out. Now, of those, the Middle East have very few. We call those gazelles. You know, the beautiful gazelles. They just jump and fall and adjust and run again, and they're very versatile, or they die. Something catches them and they die. That kind of gazelle is very rare in the Middle East. We calculate that between 40 and 80%, it's a big range, but country by country goes between 40 and 80% of companies that have less than 10 employees will always have less than 10 employees. They won't grow out. They won't grow up. So how do you bring this economic dynamism, and this will be the subject of the book to be presented by Abdullah and his team. There are 4 principles I would like to leave on the table. I'm happy to discuss that we do see in other parts of the world. The first is there has to be a level playing field. If this was a soccer game, a football game, you can't have one team playing down and the other one playing up. You truly need a level playing field for all players, whether these are the big investors coming from abroad or the small investor generated within a neighborhood. If there is going to be a subsidy, it has to be amenable to all. If there is going to be a treatment, a special treatment, it has to be available to all. That's the first characteristic of countries that show a lot of gazelles. The second one is this idea of smart industrial policy. And I have to tell you, when the World Bank speaks about industrial policy in Washington, the windows shake because there is a big intellectual conflict, I would call, almost generational conflict between those that say industrial policy never works and those that say 40 years ago when I did it in my country, it did work. So there is this permanent tension around industrial policy. The way we walk out of that tension is to say we look for smart industrial policy. And what we mean by that is if you are going to give something, give it to everyone on a competitive basis, give it on a time-bound basis, don't do it for life, and do it performance-based. Meaning, I'll give you this, that this could be a tax exemption, or that this could be a subsidy or access to a particular piece of land, only if you perform in a certain way. From all the experience we have, and by now there is plenty of data, the best performance measurement is, did you get to export? Are you succeeding in the other markets, in the more difficult markets? Are you breaking the walls, not here because you have friends, but the walls outside our own country? So the first is the playing field, the second is this smart industrial policy, the third is, I have to say, competition. The gazelles prosper in competition. It's very difficult for them to have any incentive to innovate if they don't have to. I come from a country where competition is a bad word. So everything is protected. And it's so protected that we consumers pay the cost for it. Everything is more expensive, everything is less quality. And firms don't grow because they don't have to innovate. The productivity is by international standards very low. And finally, there is a catch-all phrase that we use, the level playing field, the smart industrial policy, the competition, but then the final catchphrase is the quality of your business climate. The quality of your business climate. And what we mean by that is, do you treat investors fairly, let alone well? The investor today, the one we know, is very flexible. It can be with us or can be in another country. It can keep the money, it's a domestic investor, it can keep it at home, even under the mattress, or it can invest it in a small shop around the corner. They have the speed to decide one way or the other, and what they decide on, the primary variable pushing their decision one way or the other is how well they feel the government is treating them. In Latin America, we did a good piece of research, it was published a few years ago by 3 colleagues of ours. They found that small improvements in the business environment, particularly on contract enforcement and clarity of regulation, increased productivity in most firms by almost a third. That's a huge jump. That means for the same amount of assets, you produce so much more that you reduce poverty much faster. So I don't want to bore you too much with this. You will hear another presentation by my colleagues. I just want to say that 20 years ago, the World Bank sent you a young economist to look at what was stopping the private sector from creating more jobs. That young economist teamed up with another very young economist, distinguished economist from Egypt, Dr. El Diwani here, I think we made some progress, but not enough. It's beautiful that today the bank sends you another young economist, 20 years past, to explain why now we will be successful. So thank you very much. Abdullah, please.
It's good to see you.
Good to see you.
It's so nice to see you.
Thank you, Marcelo. I would like to thank